Did you know jet fighters could dance? Ever wonder how the Navy almost took the legendary F-86 Sabre and turned it into a shipborne jet fighter? The answer is the FJ-2 Fury, a plane with a fascinating short-lived career. We're diving deep into the development, challenges, and ultimate fate of the FJ-2 Fury. Buckle up and subscribe for more epic aviation history. The Korean War was a brutal dance between jets. The Soviet MiG-15 ruled the roost at first, packing a powerful punch and screaming across the sky at ear-splitting speeds. But by December 1950, the Americans had their ace in the hole, the North American F-86 Sabre. This sleek fighter jet wasn't perfect. It wasn't exactly built for taking off from aircraft carriers, but it could outmaneuver anything the communists threw at it. The F-86 saw one of the first epic dogfights between jets, leaving fiery trails across the Korean sky. However, this amazing plane had one big drawback. It couldn't land on ships. That's where the FJ-2 Fury comes in. The Navy needed a jet that could bring the F-86's muscle to the sea, and the Fury was the answer. In late 1944, a race was on. North American Aviation, Douglas and Vought all wanted to build the US Navy's first official jet fighter. North America won with their design, starting with just a sketch named NA-135. This early design would eventually become the FJ-1 Fury, a jet that bridged the gap between propelled planes and the jet age. The FJ-1 Fury was heavily inspired by North America's famous propeller plane, the P-51 Mustang. It even looked a lot like its older brother, with a similar tail, wing, and canopy. The Fury had a straight wing design, tricycle landing gear for taking off and landing, and a single jet engine running through the middle of the plane. They made a few key changes though. The cockpit was moved further back into the fuselage for better visibility and easier landings on aircraft carriers. The prototype took to the skies in the fall of 1946, and by the next year, they had built 30 Furies. By spring 1948, the Navy's VF-5A squadron made history with the first ever jet fighter landing on an aircraft carrier. The Fury's career landing on the USS Boxer was a big leap for jet fighters at sea, but it also showed some limitations. The plane could take off on its own, but a full deck meant trouble. The Fury needed the entire length of the carrier to get airborne safely, and without a catapult launch, it had a slow climb that was too dangerous for everyday use. This meant the first Fury jets were mostly stuck in testing, achieving only limited success. However, this straight-winged jet paved the way for a true legend. Back then, important German research on swept wings wasn't widely known, so the first Fury stuck with the standard design of the time. This design used swept wings to reduce drag as the plane approached the speed of sound, a whole new chapter in airplane technology, but the Navy's Fury project soon took a turn of its own. The Air Force's amazing F-86 Sabre became America's first swept-wing fighter, finally able to compete with the Soviet swept-wing MiGs, dominating the Korean War skies. Interestingly, the experimental Sabre originally had a straight-wing design, just like the first Fury, but the design was changed to swept wings, which helped the F-86 soar to greatness. These swept wings allowed the Sabre to engage in high-speed dogfights with Soviet jets, some of the first jet-on-jet battles ever. It's no surprise the Sabre became one of the most important and memorable fighter jets of the Korean War and one of the most significant ever built. Not only was it successful, but its legacy includes being able to break the speed of sound in a dive. The late 1940s saw the birth of the Sabre, a jet fighter that dominated the skies for a decade before becoming outdated by the end of the 1950s. This versatile aircraft remained a valuable tool for many air forces, even on the front lines. In fact, it holds the record for the most produced Western jet fighter ever, with a whopping 9,860 units built. But the Sabre had one key weakness: it couldn't operate from aircraft carriers. The Navy needed a fighter that could take to the seas, and the trusty Sabre seemed like a good starting point. By 1951, it was clear that the Navy's current straight-wing fighters were no match for the Soviets' jets they faced. New swept-wing fighters were in the works, but they wouldn't be ready for deployment anytime soon. In a rush to get capable jet fighters onto carriers, the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics decided to modify the successful Sabre. The result was the North American FJ-2 Fury. However, this plan had a big risk. the Air Force's version of the Sabre simply couldn't land on aircraft carriers. There was a glimmer of hope though. Navy pilots noticed that the F-86 actually had a slower landing speed than the Grumman F-9F Panther, a jet fighter already in use by the Navy. Taking advantage of this, North Americans argued that their swept-wing Sabre could compete with the best straight-wing fighters in terms of handling and low-speed performance. With the Panther potentially facing retirement if it couldn't improve its stalling speed, the Navy took a gamble on the FJ-2 Fury. They ordered 300 planes, even before the prototype had even flown. The very first Fury to take flight wasn't actually the first one built, but the third. It soared into the sky on December 27, 1951. This new seafaring Sabre looked pretty similar to the standard Air Force F-86E-10, except for its firepower. The Fury packed a punch with four 20mm Colt Mark 12 cannons, unlike the original setup. Whilst the first two built weren't armed at first, they were eventually tricked out for carrier duty. The Navy had a specific wish list for their ship-borne Sabre. They wanted wings that folded up for tight spaces, a longer nose strut to tilt the plane up for landings, and a special tailhook to snag onto the arresting gear on the carrier. Despite the gamble of adapting the Air Force jet, the Navy managed to pull it off. The new FJ-2s even got special fittings to launch from powerful new steam catapults, some of the first planes ever to test this high-tech kit on a US Navy carrier. The trials began in August 1952 with the USS Midway, followed by tougher tests to qualify for full carrier operations on the USS Coral Sea later that year. Unfortunately, the results weren't all sunshine and rainbows. The Fury handled poorly at slow speeds, and the parts that grabbed onto the carrier and took the landing impact, the arrestor hook and nose gear, just weren't strong enough for the rough and tumble of everyday use. The first production Fury took flight in late 1952, packed with Navy tweaks. Its landing gear widened for ship landings, wings folded for tighter spaces, and the wing shield improved for better pilot views. Unlike the original, the production model had a special tail and stronger nose wheel strut to handle the stress of catapult launches. While the outside looked similar, the Fury sported a different engine and packed a heavier punch. Sadly, despite all the work, the Fury still wasn't quite right for carriers. It struggled at low speeds and couldn't handle the rough landings. So, instead of soaring from ships, the FJ-2 Fury ended up with the Marines, providing muscle on land. The Korean War needed more regular Sabres, so building the FJ-2 slowed way down. Production didn't really ramp up until the war ended, and even then, only a handful were ready by 1953. The first Fury didn't even reach the Marines until early 1954. On top of that, the Navy discovered the F-9F Cougar was lighter and handled better at slower speeds, making it a much better fit for carriers. So, they happily handed off all 200 FJ-2s to the Marines. The Marines tried to fix the Fury's handling issues for carrier use, but it just never worked well enough. Within a few years, the FJ-2 was gone from active duty, and even reserve units got rid of them by 1957. But the Navy wasn't giving up. While the FJ-2 was still under development, they were already planning its successor, the FJ-3. The FJ-2's engine wasn't cutting it, so the Navy looked for a replacement. They found it in a British engine called the Armstrong-Siddeley Sapphire. An American company built a version called the Wright J65, which offered 28% more power for almost the same weight. To fit this new engine, they modified an FJ-2 with a deeper tail section for better airflow. Early versions of the new plane, called the FJ-3, had the same wings as the FJ-2, but later models, nicknamed the 6-3 wing, had leading edges that stretched out a bit more. This made the plane more maneuverable, but also a touch trickier to land. Overall, the Navy loved the FJ-3. It flew better than most F-86s and way better than the FJ-2. They built over 500 FJ-3s, more than double the number of FJ-2s. The Navy even planned a final Fury, the FJ-4, but that ended up being a completely different design altogether. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the daring world of the FJ-2 Fury and the indomitable spirit of historical jet fighters, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.